Okay, we've talked a lot about the Younger Dryas event on the channel here over the past few years. This is an event that we know now happened and has been confirmed, but it was just pseudo-archaeology up until a few years ago. In fact, really quite recently, the archaeological community has gotten together and agreed upon that idea that it does seem like it had happened. It got held off because it was catastrophism, and basically it was trying, they thought, to show something to do with the biblical idea that they had written off years ago of possibly happening. Which is strange because the timeline doesn't fit at all. And really, the biblical flood was from Samaria, but that's for a different video. This anomaly that happened originally we thought was a double or triple strike that happened across the North American ice shelf. It's the reason we don't really have a crater for it, but they didn't even really actually impact. They had a bolide event where they pretty much exploded right above the land. We've had a few of those happen in our modern time too, and the Tunguska event. But this was much bigger, and each one in itself was much bigger than the Tunguska event. Recently I did a video showing that one of these did hit, and it looks like it made a huge crater, some 32 kilometers across, in Iceland, known as Hiawatha Crater. And also, the extent of the damage seemed to have come across into Europe and all the way down into the Middle East at an ancient Neptunes site known as Abu Huraira. I also did a recent video where it looks like one of these events happened in a much more modern time than this 12,000 years ago, and was probably the biblical idea of Sodom and Gomorrah. So it's starting to look like things like this happened a little bit more than we were even saying just recently, when we were agreeing that it had already happened, and it had happened a few times. But of course, we want everything to feel prosperous, and so nobody wants to refer to things like this. This is another place showing an event happening during the same time period, but it hasn't been totally correlated yet. In fact, it gives a hint about another idea. This is a article, and I will pin it down in the comments for y'all to look at. It's the full paper here, but it's not that huge. But I won't be reading the whole thing to you. You're welcome. Widespread glasses generated by cometary fireballs during the late Pleistocene in the Atacama Desert in Chile. Twisted and folded silicate glasses up to 50 centimeters across, concentrated in certain areas across the Atacama Desert near Pica, which is in northern Chile, indicate nearly simultaneous, or seconds to minutes apart, intense air bursts close to Earth's surface near the end of the Pleistocene. The evidence includes mineral decompositions that require ultra-high temperatures, dynamic modes of emplacement for the glasses, which just means it got caught in an explosion, and entrained meteoritic dust. Thousands of identical meteoric grains trapped in these glasses show compositions and assemblages that resemble those found exclusively in comets and CL group primitive chondrites. Combined with the broad distribution of the glasses, the Pica glasses provide the first clear evidence for a cometary body or bodies exploding at low altitude. This occurred soon after the arrival of proto-archaic hunter-gatherers around the time of the rapid climate change in the southern hemisphere. Well, when they were writing this, they didn't know that we had already found and verified footprints of over 23,000 years ago, so even doubling the date that they're saying just after arrival. If 10,000 years is just after arrival, we've got a problem with our terms. So let's look at this PDF that they've got here, and there's some good pictures that go along with it that'll kind of show you what they were looking at. Supplemental material, widespread glasses generated by cometary fireballs during the late Pleistocene in the Atacama Desert. So in this, they talk about dynamic misplacement of fragments and floating all around, and it's written like a lawyer wrote it somehow or something, right? But to basically get to the point here, they talk about polished and unpolished carbon-coated, non-contaminated samples, and that these samples, what it looks like it happened, okay, was this comet came across and broke apart into 3 or 4 pieces, and in doing so, as it was reaching its bolide point and exploding here, the first one, which the second one outreached, and the third one outreached. When the first one exploded, it caused a bunch of glass, kind of like the desert glass in Libya that was caused by a similar event, but instead of it just being silica sand, so effectively what makes glass, so it left us behind that glass that's kind of yellowish see-through that's in Tutankhamun's brooch and so on that we talked about. This impregnated a bunch of other stuff inside of it, and ash and all kinds of minerals and stuff and dirt, and so it's really dirty mud glass almost, if you will. But in doing so, whenever the first one had hit and caused it all to melt up, whenever the second one hit and it caused its explosion, it blew back with a pressure wave across the first one. And apparently the third one did the same thing. And then there's an extender to where there's a fourth one. And strangely, it looks like there's a missing one. Like it goes 1, 2, 3, nothing, 4. This may actually be the reason that the Atacama Desert became a desert, and of course climate change, great word used nowadays, didn't allow it to come back and turned it into the desert that it is today. But a lot more tests need to be done even to date this. In fact, they talk about these nickel-bearing trollites and all of these different compositions that are in here, and those compositions are different than a normal meteorite strike, which is going to show a whole lot of iron and a little bit of nickel. There's some of that composition in here, but also these copper ferrite silicates and stuff that are along with it, and others seem to be the things that they trapped whenever they followed a comet here back decades ago, or inside the last decade, and they followed a comet, and they, with the gel material and stuff, they trapped all the particles from it and wanted to see what it was made out of, because surely it's a whole lot of ice, but there's other stuff, which is a concentration of these same type of minerals. So again, it's pretty exciting because this appears to be a verification on that. Well, was it a meteor that air bursted? Was it this? Was it that? No, it looks like a cometary fragment impact. And the comet, previous to coming into our atmosphere, was already breaking apart. And because of its stretch and pulling on the atmosphere, they got separated and pulled apart a little bit. And as they started to bolide and explode, they went 1, 2, 3, and the last chunk made it a little farther, and then pow. So I'm not going to read all this to you like I said, but here they talk about the nature of the Pica bolides, right? And Similar chemistry and morphology related to those both in sea ice, cometary material, that's what we were talking about, but the entire exogenic mineral suite compare quite well with sea ice or combination of sea ice and CVs, which these are the cometary data that we already have off of it. And it says, it's not something that's not on the planet, by the way. We've been hit by so many of these things that these minerals are all over the planet, and they're a part of what made the primordial earth up. But when you see concentrations and so on, and then it's associated with glass and all of these things. See, when the first one exploded and it kicked up everything in the atmosphere, and some of it was on fire and so on, when the second one exploded and the concussion wave kicked in back into the first one's stuff that was ejected in the atmosphere, it smeared it and caused those compression quartz shocking type of material, and a lot of it's just teardropped and slung. The original idea when they first found this was there might have just been a big forest fire, because they know that this place primordially, before this event, before the last ice age, had a lot of plants on it. It's kind of like we talk about the green Sahara, but this had a lot of plants on it and so on, right? So again, metamorphism by a transient high pressure shock wave, and resulting in winds exceeding 100 meters per second over an area of 25 kilometers. Consequently, the trapped meteorite minerals record a wide range of conditions. The ubiquitous occurrence of unmelted meteoric assemblages within vesicles also requires particles were entrained immediately after initial melting, consistent with meteoritic debris in a trailing wake. So, to get back onto it a little, or more into it, their original proposed origin was by grass fires, or that they had had some huge fire, because we know fires can get up to a huge amount of heat, but what they realize is a couple of things. It can't get up to this heat no matter what, unless the trees fell in the right way and a huge amount of wind is blowing up inside of them and creating a furnace, and then it's not going to cause this amount of area. It's just unfeasible whatsoever, right? But then whenever they check that soil and so on, they realize, no, there's some stuff that got ejected up in the air and it was on fire. So if you want to go with a forest fire, well, okay, it was a forest fire, and then a meteor hit and blew the crap up in the air, because, hey, we've got evidence here. So the signatures that keep showing in this are pretty important, and reveal that not only is this some type of bolide event, which we always noticed before, but that it is cometary in nature, and very much like a couple of comets that we've already tested, which might even be telltale that those are little pieces floating and zigging around from bigger pieces. There's some pretty important statements trapped within all of this lingo that they've got going on here, and there's a clay level that's associated with where it's at, which would have been a foliage level that they've got trapped below all of this glass, and show you some pictures here in a second. It's going to show you that it was actually to the point of flowing, and not something where it bisqued it and you saw this thin piece of glass show up. Here they talk about the different figures and what it's going to look like, and they have embedded soils and paleo grass and so on like that going on. Twigs, stuff that's trapped inside of this glass, and they keep talking about it. So instead of describing it out, why don't we just take a look at it? I'll zoom in here a little bit more, see if I can get it about right. So hopefully you can make out with these desert swirls here that there are some mounds that are associated, and each one's got that little white spots that are on this, and this is one of the sites. Like one blew up here, and then one blew up way down there, and another one blew up way down there, and then it skipped, and one got to sail over the whole thing and blow up way down there. And the one that they're looking at here that they've confirmed off of it gives a 25-kilometer radius. And see that one that's there, the second one, is not 25 kilometers away. And so whenever some of this stuff was ejecting out 25 kilometers and ejecting out and going that way, this one blew up and slapped some of it back. But apparently, the way I understand it, this area here is whenever it came down and set up fire, this all ignited. By the way, this looks like a pretty flat desert right now, but again, this place was covered with trees and grasses at the time of this happening. So here's one look at one closer point, and you can see the arrows in the distance of all these other ones. And what this actually is an incrustation of glass with all those stuff mixed in with it. And they'll show some closer looks at it here, but here's kind of an idea where the yellow outline pieces, and you can see where a truck drove through here, but these yellow outline pieces are still exposed places that had just bisqued and created so much glass that it's feet thick. And while it was feet thick, an explosion hit it and then took most of the stuff that's off the top of it and blew it back out again while it was hot molten, and then it froze real quick, or became solid again, not freezing, but you get the idea of what I'm saying. Just a little area here that's very strange, and that whole crustation that you see right in front of you is all this glass, if you'll call it that. It's not really what we think of as glass. It's like car glass or windows in your house. It's pretty extensive, all these different places, and they show concentrations of areas. Some of these chunks of rock, like this one up forward that they've got this marker next to here, is huge. Shows you the extent of how thick it was at one time. In fact, we'll look at them a little closer here as we go in. Strange melting, which shows a smearing running along a line like this, like that's where it blew out. You look at the one on the left here, you can actually see that it kind of dripped off this here, and it's all hanging down, and there would have been dripples coming off of this. Pretty thick, totally molten. Again, on the right, same type of effect. I believe that's a close-up of the area. This is a close-up of this area. So all kinds of things are trapped inside of it too. Here's a nickel, I guess, that's in it, and so you can see that it molten dripped off the edge of something here, and it's quite a bit of glass. This is not some thin sheet like I was talking about. Here we can kind of see that effect where it got blown over. It looked like this stuff was all bubbled up, and then something blew this way and blew that way, and it left all these lines, like all these bubblings were bubbling up, right? And every one of those bubbles just got smeared over real quick. Blah! You can kind of see it better here a little bit in some area where it looks like this is kind of a spread out point, but all of this across here in general, wow. So this was probably something that would pop. And all these little bumps that are on this rock used to have other little bumps and bubbles that are on them too, but the bubbly type stuff got blown out, and that's what shows up in all this shot glass and these things like that. So it's a little different effect than the other meteors that are there, and they're showing that, well, that and the minerals that are composed within them show that it's that's something quite different. It even took rocks and just bisqued them from the internal part of it here. So it's anything that was around at this time was gone. Anything that witnessed it didn't live afterwards. So here you can see the glass layer they talk about, and it gets down here, and within a foot of the surface, there's a little clay thin layer that's over here, and then all that paleo grass and trees and remnants that were there from before. So they've got to do a few more tests, of course, and then they've got apparently 4 locations out of this, 3 that are clustered together, and then a skip, and then 1 more. And that makes me think that probably that same kind of concept went on in the North America version, where it's on the ice shelf though, and 1, 2, 3 in a skip, and then 4 in Iceland. But apparently on that one there was a 5th too, because it hits Abu Huraira. Or you could think of it another way. Perhaps the world was spinning around and some of these came in day after day, but almost at the same spot, which doesn't make as much sense. Strangely, this might actually date slightly different, and they talk about it in the paper up above, where this actually might date to the other spike. So when we were looking at the data from before of the ice core and the way it works out, the thing that really can show us and pinpoint is the fact that it was going along smooth, and then it was starting to go back up, maybe at the angle that I'm putting my finger at here, and then something happened and the bowling yellow rod went up and then back down. But in general, other than that little pimple here, it's basically on that same line. And around about halfway up, 3/4, all of a sudden it drops all the way down to just the same cold as the Ice Age. And it tries to climb back up and get on line with my finger, and then it does it again, and then it comes back up rapidly and rides out. This might be not exactly at the same time, but it may be either the initial strike or the secondary. So the one that made pulse water A or B, if you will, or whatever. So you can see here they talk about paleoglass clay, and it's encrusted on top of it. Totally bisques. And here's that Cubanite, trawlite with nickel into it, pyrrolite lath, different crystals that are associated with this, and then that shock quartz concept that goes on here, where it's like one of those bubbles blown up in the air, and then that pressure hits it so strong at one point it changes the composition of the way it would look. It's not something that happens normally. So they talk about the event that it may be associated with again, and they talk about the Younger Dryas event, but it's not totally dated at this point. They've got to check out whether that grass, and they've got to dig some more places around here and find some associated and closely associated organic matter and get it tested. And I believe they've already done this. They're getting it tested, and they'll come up with a date off of that. Now, if it shows up a slightly different date, that's probably going to show you that there was the AB, the North America, and this one here. And there may be other strikes that were associated with this one here, or another chunk or whatever, but that's pretty much enough with what it is. And then the North American one too. One wonders which one came first. Looks like maybe North America, and then it was coming back up, and then this one, and that's what staggered it and made it stutter there right before it came back up. Just one more example that all this stuff isn't so much kosher, and while we've got the technology going on before we get obliterated again, we ought to start doing something about it. And people are slowly pulling the thumb out their ass and starting to talk about it. I've seen a lot of people just turn around and say, well, it's useless right now because we couldn't do anything. Well, if something was coming, and it's a mistake to just blow it up with nukes because it'll make smaller ones, why don't we throw about 20 nukes at it in succession, and that pressure will keep trying to shatter stuff away from us, and we may go through a meteor shower for the next 10,000 years like we did from this last one here, and it appears that it goes along with it, of the remnants were there, but at least we save all of humanity rather than standing there with our thumb up our ass telling us how we can't do it. Can't, never could. And surely won't. Let me know what you think downstairs, though, but hey, here's another one of those confirmations. Now, there will be one come out later than this that's a double confirmation on the fact of what the dating is and how that all works, and a little bit better. And look for it here in the future. I'm guessing it's probably about 8 months to a year off. Peace.